My wife threw a big surprise party to celebrate her promotion. My parents raised their glasses to her. To the real breadwinner and wonderful daughter-in-law. Everyone cheered, while I stayed quiet. Later that night she handed me a t-shirt that read, "The loser of the house." The next morning, when she went to work, her boss urgently called her into his office. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 99 desperate messages from her, after she realized the truth. You know, the night my marriage finally flatlined, the actual moment it died, no one even saw it. Not my family, not our friends, and honestly, not even me at first. It wasn't some Hollywood explosion, no slammed doors or dramatic confessions. It was quieter, insidious. It was like a tiny, invisible crack suddenly spiderwebbing through something you once believed was absolutely, undeniably unbreakable. Our house was practically glowing that night, buzzing with this almost feverish, fake congratulatory energy and all this hollow laughter. Marissa, my wife, my partner for nearly a decade, she was throwing herself a surprise promotion party. And by surprise, I mean she'd orchestrated every single detail, down to the last sparkling napkin, then perfectly executed a shocked gasp when everyone predictably jumped out from behind the kitchen island. Yeah, that kind of surprise. The guests? They just poured in like a tidal wave, riding high on cheap champagne and Marissa's meticulously curated playlist. My parents, Gerald and Lorraine Cross, they were the first ones to hoist their glasses, their faces absolutely beaming as if they were witnessing the birth of royalty. To the real breadwinner! My dad, Gerald, bellowed, sloshing his drink dangerously close to the cream carpet. And our wonderful daughter-in-law! My mom, Lorraine, cackled, clutching Marissa's arm with this almost desperate grip, the kind you usually reserve for emergency landings. I just stood there, holding a glass of flat soda, offering silent nods as the room erupted into cheers. That phrase, breadwinner, it echoed in my ears long after the laughter died down. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it, you know? Lately, it had been creeping into everything, family dinners, casual brunches, those whispered jokes people made when they thought I wasn't listening. And me? I always just shrugged it off. What did it matter? We were a team, right? We built this life together. Or that's what I'd spent years convincing myself. As usual, I stayed out of the spotlight. Marissa, of course, was draped across the center of every photo, the star of every story, the architect of every memory made that night. I just floated at the edges of conversations, a barely noticed shadow. Even when they posed for group shots, arms around each other, champagne glasses raised high, it was like I wasn't part of the narrative at all. I was just the background noise, the guy holding the camera instead of being in the frame, totally invisible. Around midnight, after the last slice of cake had been abandoned on paper plates, and the last of the faux adoration had finally dried up, I found myself alone in the kitchen, scraping frosting off the counter with the edge of a fork. That's when Marissa strolled in, still absolutely buzzing from all the attention, a smug little smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She was still in her brand new promotion dress, a tight red number she charged to our shared card without so much as a mention. She sauntered up to me like a queen addressing the hired help, and that's when she handed it to me. A neatly folded t-shirt. I blinked, genuinely confused at first, until I unfolded it and read the bold black letters stretching across the fabric. The loser of the house. I laughed. At least I think it was a laugh. It sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Marissa laughed too, tossing her hair over her shoulder in that practiced way that used to make my chest ache with affection. It's a joke, babe, she chirped, patting my chest like she was rewarding a golden retriever for rolling over on command. Lighten up. I just smiled, this polite, mechanical smile that didn't touch my eyes, didn't reach my soul. I held the t-shirt up for a second longer, letting it flap gently in the breeze of the overhead fan before neatly folding it again and setting it down on the cold marble island. Inside me, something shifted. Something clicked, like a safe finally unlocking. It wasn't anger. Not even sadness. It was just this quiet, searing clarity that cut through all the layers of denial I'd wrapped myself in over the years. This wasn't an isolated moment, you see. It was the culmination of 1,000 smaller betrayals. Every sneer, every undermining comment, every single time she had chosen applause over partnership. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was done. The strangest thing was how easy it felt once that decision crystallized. I didn't storm out. I didn't shout or slam doors. I simply existed in a space that no longer belonged to me, knowing I had already left it in every way that truly mattered. I leaned against the counter, watched Marissa disappear into the living room to FaceTime her best friend about the amazing night, and I felt something almost like peace settle over me. The man she mocked, the so-called loser, was already gone. She just hadn't noticed yet. Later that night, after she'd passed out with a wine glass still clutched in her hand, I sat alone in our bedroom. The t-shirt was folded neatly beside me on the bed. I traced the letters with my fingertips, feeling nothing. Not rage, not bitterness, just a steady, quiet sense of inevitability. I thought about the years we had spent together, about the dreams we once shared, the ones that had quietly morphed into something I barely recognized anymore. I thought about the man I used to be, and the man I was finally ready to become. Not for her. Not for the approval of parents or coworkers or social media strangers. For me. I slipped the t-shirt into the bottom drawer of my dresser, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. A reminder that tonight, in a house full of noise and hollow celebration, the real victory was happening quietly, invisibly, right beneath the surface. I had smiled politely, but inside I had already started walking away. The next morning, the sunlight cut sharp and clean through the blinds, slicing the room into strips of light and shadow. Marissa was already awake, perched in front of her vanity mirror, curling her hair with the slow, practiced movements of someone preparing for an audience. I lay still for a moment, just staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me like a heavy, invisible hand. Today was the day everything would shift. Today was the day I stopped living under someone else's thumb. I rose quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace of the morning. Marissa barely glanced at me, too busy humming some mindless pop song as she sculpted herself into the woman the world adored. Her reflection winked at itself, a satisfied, self-assured smirk curling on her lips. She had no idea what was about to hit her. No inkling that the pedestal she'd spent years building was about to crumble beneath her designer heels. I crossed to the closet and pulled out my briefcase. It was already packed. I'd prepared it weeks ago, tucking away every document, every carefully labeled folder, every recording burned onto sleek little USB drives. In the side pocket, my laptop sat charged and ready, its screen glowing faintly with a draft of an email scheduled to be sent at exactly 8:30 a.m. The final piece of a plan I had nurtured in silence, one careful move at a time. Marissa, completely oblivious, leaned closer to the mirror, puckering her lips to apply a coat of red lipstick that screamed confidence and authority. She looked every bit the queen she believed herself to be. In the past, that image would have made my heart swell with pride. Today, it left me cold. Big day, she chirped without turning around, her voice light and dripping with false sweetness. You going to be okay without me tonight? Another networking dinner. Very important people. You know how it is. I just nodded, offering a thin smile she didn't bother to see. I wondered if she even remembered what today was. Not that it mattered. This wasn't about a forgotten birthday or anniversary. It was about years of erosion. Small cuts that had finally bled me dry. And now, standing here in the cool, sterile light of morning, I realized I wasn't the one who had lost anything. I was about to reclaim it all. She grabbed her bag, a glossy black tote that probably cost more than my first car, and slung it over her shoulder with a practiced flick. As she moved toward the door, she tossed a smirk over her shoulder. A little private victory dance she performed every morning, as if leaving me behind was some kind of prize. Don't wait up, she said, disappearing down the hallway with a click of high heels on hardwood. The front door slammed. Silence swallowed the house. I glanced at the clock. 8:29 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers drumming lightly on the polished oak surface, listening to the steady tick of the wall clock, counting down the final seconds. 8:30. The laptop screen blinked, confirming the scheduled email had been sent. I closed the device with a soft, decisive snap and exhaled slowly, feeling the air leave my lungs like a slow leak from a tire that had been under pressure for far too long. Across town, in the sleek glass towers of Marissa's office building, a ripple had already started. A quiet storm gathering force. Her boss, Simon Keene, the man she endlessly praised and flirted with at company parties, thinking I didn't notice, he'd be the first to open the file. Inside? Detailed accounts, irrefutable evidence, names, dates, numbers. All the pieces they needed to see the truth. Marissa hadn't climbed a ladder through brilliance alone. Oh no. She had stepped on others to do it, buried complaints, fudged numbers, cut corners, and smiled sweetly through every single lie. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the wood like a trapped insect. I let it buzz, the first of many I knew. I watched the screen light up with her name, Marissa. A name that used to conjure up warmth now stirred nothing but a cool, clinical detachment. The buzzing stopped, then started again almost immediately. I took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring the simple, grounding bitterness of it. Freedom, it turned out, tasted like Colombian dark roast with a hint of rebellion. By 9:05, the calls were coming faster, stacked on top of one another, a frantic cascade. I flipped the phone over so I wouldn't see the screen. I didn't need to hear the panic in her voice. I could imagine it well enough, the rising pitch, the frayed edges of her carefully constructed composure shredding apart under pressure. She would be confused at first, then angry, then terrified. At 9:15, another buzz. I ignored it. I pictured her, summoned into the executive boardroom, a room she once boasted about commanding, now facing the men and women who had been fed evidence of her betrayal. I pictured Simon Keen's smug face curdling into cold fury, as he realized how much trouble she had created, how vulnerable she had made his company. Marissa had spent so long believing she was untouchable. She was wrong. So wrong. The house remained still, the ticking clock my only company. It was strange, how peaceful it felt, knowing chaos was blooming somewhere else, far from my doorstep. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup out in the sink, and packed away my laptop with the same care one uses to fold a flag. Precise, respectful, final. By the time I left the house, Marissa had sent 23 texts and called 14 times. I didn't answer any of them. I had no intention of answering. Not today, not ever again, unless it served a purpose. The storm had broken loose, and for once, I wasn't the one left standing in the wreckage. I was the one who had pulled the first thread, and I was ready for everything that came next. The funny thing about chaos is how incredibly quiet it feels when you're not the one actually caught in it. I just watched the notifications on my phone pile up, message after message, voicemail after voicemail, each one more frantic than the last. But I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, stepped out into the crisp morning air, and just went about my day like it was any other Tuesday. First stop, Leia's Cafe. It's this cozy little place tucked between the towering gray buildings of downtown. A spot Marissa never visited too. Small town. For her refined taste. And that, exactly, was why I liked it. The moment I walked through the door, the bell chimed softly and the smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls wrapped around me like an old, trusted friend. Leia herself waved from behind the counter. "Morning, handsome." "Usual?" "Make it a double," I said with a small grin. She laughed and set to work. I slid into my favorite booth by the window, the worn leather seat creaking familiarly under me. Outside, the city buzzed. People rushing to meetings, to lives they thought they controlled. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring every moment of stillness, every second of freedom blooming quietly inside me. My next appointment was a few blocks away, a meeting I had been setting up for months, one careful brick at a time. Archer Wren, my lawyer, was already waiting in his office when I arrived. Archer wasn't flashy. He didn't wear designer suits or drive a car that screamed money. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of man who built victories out of patience and paperwork. The kind of ally you wanted when you were dismantling an empire from the inside out. We sat down across from each other, the thick oak table between us littered with neat stacks of documents. Archer tapped the manila folder. "It's done," he said simply. "Signed, sealed, and ironclad. If she tries to contest, she'll lose. Hard." I just nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle deep into my bones. Archer smiled, a rare flicker of pride lighting up his usually stoic face. "Yours, lock, stock, and barrel. The final signatures went through yesterday. As of this morning, you control 51% of the parent company." It was a moment I had imagined for a long time, but now that it was here, it didn't feel loud or explosively victorious. It felt inevitable. Natural. Like stepping into shoes that had been waiting for me all along. I spent the next hour signing final papers, closing loops, tightening every legal net that needed to be secured. Archer reviewed everything with a hawk's eye, making sure no loose thread could be pulled by Marissa or anyone else desperate enough to try. When it was finished, we shook hands, a short, firm squeeze that carried the weight of months of preparation and unspoken respect. Outside Archer's office, I paused on the sidewalk, letting the reality sink in for a moment. I could feel the ripple effect already spreading through Marissa's world, tearing down the careful facade she had built. She thought she was the queen of her castle, but she never noticed the foundation rotting underneath her. And the best part? I wasn't just the messenger delivering the blow. I was the architect of the entire collapse. Simon Keene, the man Marissa had spent years chasing approval from, had received the file at exactly 8:30 a.m., right on schedule. But what he didn't realize, not yet anyway, was that the file didn't come from some bitter, betrayed husband looking for revenge. No, it came from the man who now owned the very company Simon thought he ruled. It had taken months of quiet maneuvering, careful negotiations, shell companies, and ironclad non-disclosure agreements, but I had done it. I had acquired the parent firm, the firm that controlled the company Marissa worked for, without anyone even realizing my hand was behind the purchase. Not Simon, not Marissa, not any of the smug board members who had looked through me like I was invisible at every gala and fundraiser. And now, with a single file, a single email, I had shifted the ground beneath all of them. I spent the afternoon tying up loose ends, all while ignoring the increasingly desperate flood of messages from Marissa. Her first calls had been sharp, demanding. Now they were panicked, pleading. I didn't need to listen to know the tone. I knew her well enough to predict every stage of her unraveling. Around 4 o'clock, I returned to Leia's cafe, ordered another coffee, and watched the sunset paint the city in strokes of gold and blood red. I thought about Marissa, sitting in some sterile conference room, her world crumbling around her. About Simon Keene, realizing that the man he had belittled at charity auctions now controlled his paycheck. I thought about how for so long I had played the role they wrote for me, the quiet husband, the second-place trophy. The loser of the house. I played it so well they believed it. They never looked deeper, never questioned whether the man pouring drinks at the party might have been planning something while they laughed at his expense. They played checkers. I played chess. And now, the board was entirely mine. As evening settled in, I allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about making them hurt the way they made me hurt. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself they had tried to carve away. Tomorrow would bring headlines, gossip, public implosions. Tonight was for quiet victories. Victories no one saw coming. The news broke faster than even I expected. 1 minute, Marissa was sitting smugly at her glass desk, probably planning her next power move. The next, her world was caving in around her. It started small, a ripple, an internal email about an urgent meeting. A few raised eyebrows, whispers in the hallway that grew louder with every passing minute. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, pretending to work, but all waiting, all sensing the shift in the air. The formal announcement hit the company intranet around 11 a.m. Internal investigation initiated. Effective immediately, Marissa Hole is suspended, pending a full review. Just like that, the woman who strutted through the building like she owned it was reduced to a paragraph of cold, clinical language. Her name, once spoken with admiration or envy, now drew sharp glances and muffled gossip. Internal investigation, immediate suspension, pending criminal charges, the trifecta. The friends who had cheered her on just the night before? They vanished. No more clinking glasses. No more sugary compliments. No one wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. People she once mentored didn't even look her way as she was summoned to the HR department. The social climber she used to share bottomless mimosas with didn't send a single supportive text. Simon Keene, her ever-smirking boss, didn't offer her the dignity of a private conversation. He had 2 security guards waiting at her office door. She wasn't allowed to touch her files. She wasn't even allowed to grab her personal things unsupervised. Everything she had built, every illusion of control, of power, crumbled under the fluorescent lights. She was handed a single cardboard box. No farewell party, no gold watch, no hollow speeches about new beginnings. Just a box, and a growing audience pretending not to stare as she walked down the hallway she used to command, utterly humiliated. Meanwhile, I sat comfortably in my home office, a quiet drink in my hand, watching everything unfold on the hidden security cameras I had installed months ago. Cameras she never noticed. Cameras she never cared to ask about. It was almost poetic. The woman who loved being the center of attention reduced to a silent movie on my screen. At exactly 3:14 p.m., I saw her stumble through our front door. Her hair was tangled from the wind, her eyes wide and rimmed with smeared mascara. Her expensive heels, the ones she once called power shoes, scuffed the hardwood as she dragged her cardboard box inside. And there it was, the final touch of irony. She was still wearing the t-shirt from the night before. Loser of the house. I leaned back in my chair, feeling no triumph, no gloating satisfaction, just a deep, resolute calm. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. She dropped the box onto the couch with a hollow thud and stood there swaying slightly, like she was trying to wake up from a bad dream. I watched her glance around the room as if expecting someone, me, maybe, to swoop in and fix it all. But no one came. Not this time. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment before throwing it across the room. It bounced harmlessly off a cushion and landed with a soft thump. Another small, impotent explosion in a long chain of them. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my own phone. I didn't send a text or make a call to check on her. She was beyond my help. She had chosen this path long before today. Every lie she told, every little manipulation she thought I was too dumb to notice, every time she treated me like a fixture instead of a partner, she paved this road brick by brick. All I did was let her walk down it. On the camera feed, she collapsed onto the floor beside the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, but I muted the sound. I didn't need to hear it to know exactly what she was feeling: fear, loneliness, the crushing realization that the world she built was made of paper, not stone. For a long time, I just sat there, sipping my drink, watching the woman who once saw herself as invincible finally realize she wasn't. Finally realized she was human. And humans bleed when the walls come crashing down. Marissa tried to storm into my office like she used to, like the woman who once held every key and every password. But the door didn't budge. She rattled the handle, banged her palm against the wood, even shouted my name. The lock, which I'd changed weeks ago without her noticing, held firm. I sat inside calm, letting her frantic knocking echo through the hallways like some distant thunderstorm I had no need to run from. When she realized I wasn't coming, she pounded harder. Her voice rose, sharp and desperate, fraying at the edges. "Open the damn door! We need to talk! You can't just leave me like this!" I leaned back in my chair and listened. Once, those words would have triggered something inside me. I need to fix things, to make everything better, to keep the peace no matter the personal cost. But not anymore. I had finally learned some fires aren't meant to be put out. Some houses are meant to burn. When the banging stopped, there was a long stretch of silence. I imagined her out there, forehead pressed against the wood, trying to summon the right words, the right tricks. She thought she could still manipulate me, that if she just cried hard enough, promised sweetly enough, I'd open the door and hand her the tools to rebuild the tower she'd knocked down herself. But the paperwork was already filed, the moves were already made. I didn't need her permission anymore. She tried the back entrance next, storming through the kitchen, expecting to find some weakness, some crack in the armor. That's when she saw the divorce papers, right where I had left them, sitting neatly on the marble countertop next to the remnants of the party cake she had so proudly displayed the night before. It was almost cruel, the way the party decorations still lingered in the air, faded balloons drooping sadly, bits of glitter clinging to the corners. Celebration one night, condemnation the next. The contrast must have gutted her. I watched from the security feed as she approached the table slowly, her steps unsteady. She picked up the papers with shaking hands, scanning the top page, her mouth moving wordlessly. Then her gaze flicked to the slice of leftover cake, still on its gold foil board. The words, "Congratulations, Marissa," smudged into oblivion by the passage of one bitter, endless night. Her hands trembled. She dropped the papers like they were burning her fingers. She must have thought she could retreat upstairs, regroup, call someone, her parents, her sister, that lawyer, friend, she always bragged about knowing. But upstairs, the reality was even harsher. She had nothing left to cling to. The house she had once fought me tooth and nail for, the house she had weaponized in every argument, bragged about to every envious coworker, wasn't hers anymore. Months ago, I had quietly transferred the deed into a private trust. One she had no claim over. One she hadn't even noticed because she was too busy curating her Instagram perfect life. It was legal. It was binding. And it was airtight. The joint accounts we once shared? Gone, emptied and moved into investments under my name alone. All legal, all meticulous. I had followed every step to the letter. Every I dotted, every T crossed. She couldn't even accuse me of theft. She had spent years letting me handle the finances because money was boring. Now, it wasn't just boring, it was fatal. When she realized the magnitude of it all, she crumpled to the floor right there in the center of the kitchen. The documents sprawled around her like dead leaves. She sobbed, loud, racking sobs that once would have cracked me straight down the middle. But now I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, not even satisfaction. This wasn't cruelty. This was justice. I thought about all the times I had stood exactly where she was now, broken, unheard, begging for a shred of respect, a flicker of acknowledgement. I thought about the times she rolled her eyes at my ideas, laughed at my dreams, cut me down in front of friends under the guise of joking. I thought about the nights I stayed awake wondering what I had done wrong, only to realize I had done nothing wrong except trust the wrong person. And now here we were. She had built a life on top of me, using my loyalty like scaffolding. And when she thought the structure was stable enough, she kicked me aside. She forgot the most important rule: you don't destroy the foundation and expect the house to stand. Eventually, her sobs turned into quiet hiccups. I could see her slumped against the island, mascara streaked down her cheeks, staring at nothing. The phone still lay on the couch where she had thrown it hours earlier, buzzing occasionally with messages she didn't have the strength to answer. Part of me expected her to rally, to summon that sharp, manipulative side and come up with a counterattack. But sitting there, surrounded by the wreckage, she looked small, diminished, not the towering figure who had once loomed over every part of my life. Just a person. Flawed, scared, alone. I stood up from my chair and walked to the front door, stepping outside for the first time in hours. The evening air was cool against my skin, the sky darkening into a soft, bruised purple. I inhaled deeply, letting the fresh air fill my lungs, clearing out the last remnants of the man I used to be. Inside the house, Marissa was still crumbling. Outside, I was already rebuilding. Not with her. Not for her. For me. It was never just about Marissa. That's the part no one understood. Not her family, not even some of the people closest to me. They thought I was acting out of spite, that this was about a bruised ego or getting back at the woman who humiliated me. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't see the years of erosion. Slow. Quiet. Merciless. That came not from one betrayal, but from 1,000 cuts. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Reclaiming everything she tried to strip from me. My dignity, my confidence, my sense of worth. Things that had been buried under layers of manipulation, sarcasm disguised as banter, and silence where love used to live. I didn't fall into this overnight. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to burn everything down. I had been rebuilding in secret for a long, long time. It started with small choices, unassuming ones, saying no instead of nodding, making space in the garage for my own projects, reading books I'd hidden away for years, taking walks alone without checking in. Every step gave me back a piece of myself. Every decision added weight to the man I was becoming again. Then came the larger moves. The ones that took planning, precision, patience. Archerin wasn't just my lawyer. He was my friend. We met back in college. Back when I still believed that love meant sacrificing everything. He had been at the wedding, even helped me pick the cufflinks Marissa would later say. Looked too humble. Archer watched the years wear me down, but never pushed. He waited until I came to him, until I asked the hard questions. How do I protect myself? What would it take to walk away clean? He didn't give me pep talks. He gave me plans. He introduced me to Mateo Sinclair next. Another old college friend, though I hadn't seen him in almost a decade. Back in school, Mateo was the loud one, the charming risk-taker with wild business ideas and a laptop full of code. He'd gone on to build a tech consulting firm, wildly successful, always under the radar. And I'd been one of the silent investors he never forgot. When I reached out, Mateo didn't ask questions. He offered opportunity, a seat at a new table, quiet ownership of a firm position to make strategic acquisitions, including eventually the parent company that Marissa's firm answered to. It was Mateo who set up the first introductions. Archer who handled the paperwork. Me? I did what I always did. Stayed quiet. Stayed invisible. Stayed underestimated. That was the secret. Marissa and her world never saw me coming. Simon Keene was the kind of man who only learned to speak by hearing himself talk. He didn't just overlook me, he dismissed me entirely. At company parties, he would throw an arm around my shoulder, glass of scotch in hand, and ask if I was still doing that home project thing. Like I was some well-fed hobbyist kept afloat by his high-performing executive. He never imagined I'd become the man signing his checks. The day we closed the acquisition, I didn't even attend the final meeting. Matteo did. Archer was there, too. I watched the handshake happen over a secure video link while sipping coffee in my kitchen. No fanfare, no fireworks, just business. That's the thing about real power. It's quiet, measured, effective. Once the acquisition was finalized, the next phase began. The documents we sent to Simon, the files detailing Marissa's misconduct, they weren't just a strategic bomb. They were a reflection of everything I had endured. Every falsified report, every silenced complaint she'd buried with charm and intimidation. It wasn't about destroying her. It was about exposing the lies she'd built her success on. And it worked. The fallout spread like wildfire, not just through her company, but through the wider industry. The whispers began. Was it true? Did she really do all that? How did no one catch this earlier? I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. But the real shift, the deeper one, was internal. I no longer flinched when people looked at me. I no longer apologized for taking up space, for speaking plainly, for having ambition. I remembered what it felt like to have purpose again, to stand on ground that wasn't shifting under someone else's weight. The friends who stuck around during the dark times, the ones who never judged, never asked why I stayed so long, they were still with me, and now they saw me rise, not with fanfare or ego, but with quiet certainty. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was building something that didn't require it. Marissa, meanwhile, was still spiraling. Her texts had grown erratic. Apologetic one minute, accusatory the next. We were partners, she wrote. How could you just abandon everything we had? The irony was suffocating. She never realized that I had been abandoned years ago. Not in action, but in heart. She had stopped being my partner long before I stopped being her husband. Now I was the man she never imagined I'd become. The one she tried to keep small. The one who learned to play the long game. Every smug glance she'd ever thrown. Every time she scoffed at my ideas, every dismissive laugh across a crowded dinner party, they all had a cost. And she was finally paying the bill. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance, and I was done living in deficit. The text started changing tone around midnight. At first, they were just frantic little flashes, desperate pings lighting up my phone screen like dying fireflies. I'm sorry. Please, let's just talk. I made a mistake. I can fix this. I turned my phone face down on the nightstand and let them pile up, unread, like leaves gathering in a forgotten street. By morning, the messages had evolved from pleading to bargaining, promises she couldn't keep, hopes she didn't deserve. We can get through this. We're stronger than this. I still love you. You're still my husband. That means something, right? Funny how the words that once could have broken me now barely scratched the surface. I sat on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise stretch across the city skyline. It painted the world in hues of gold and orange, crisp and clean, as if daring me to believe in new beginnings. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was simply done. It wasn't just Marissa trying to claw her way back into my life. Her family started too. Texts from her mother, her sister, even her father. The same people who once toasted her success with gleaming glasses and called me the luckiest man alive. Like it was a consolation prize. She's been through a lot, her mother wrote. She needs you. Her father was less sentimental. Man up and fix this before you destroy your marriage. I laughed when I read that one. A short, humorless sound that echoed around the empty living room. Destroy the marriage? That bridge had burned long before I ever picked up the match. They didn't understand. They saw the headlines, the scandal, the whispers around town, and thought the worst thing Marissa had lost was her career. They thought the real tragedy was the fall from grace. They couldn't comprehend a real loss, trust, partnership, the kind of love that doesn't need applause to feel real. That was gone, and nothing could resurrect it. The days blurred together, each one a fresh layer of desperation added to the pile. Marissa's texts grew longer, more erratic. Late-night calls I let ring into silence. Voicemails that started with her crying and ended with her screaming. "You're heartless!" she spat in one message. "You're not the man I married." She was right. I wasn't. The man she married would have forgiven her. Would have folded himself in half trying to fix things. Would have accepted the blame just to keep the peace. That man was dead, buried under years of belittling comments, silent resentments, and the slow, systematic erosion of self-worth. The man who stood in his place now is different. Stronger. Wiser. Unbreakable. Marissa tried every tactic. Nostalgia, guilt, seduction, anger. She sent old photos, texted memories she thought would crack my armor. "Remember our trip to Napa? Remember our first apartment? How happy we were!" She painted our past in golden light, hoping I'd forget the shadow she cast over it. But memory is a tricky thing. It doesn't just recall the good. It drags up everything. The fights disguised as jokes. The lonely nights spent 2 feet apart but worlds away. The way she would weaponize silence when words didn't cut deep enough. I remembered it all. And the good parts? They weren't enough anymore. They couldn't erase the rot underneath. Her friends, once a swirling, laughing entourage around her, fell eerily silent. No more group chats buzzing with validation. No more likes on her curated social media posts. Silence replaced adoration. And Marissa wasn't built to survive in silence. The loneliness hit her like a slow-moving train, inevitable and crushing. One afternoon, after ignoring a dozen more calls, I caught a glimpse of her outside the building. She sat in her car across the street, sunglasses on, face hidden behind the tinted glass, watching, waiting, hoping. I didn't confront her. I didn't even acknowledge her. I simply walked past, my spine straight, my heart steady, a silent message she couldn't misinterpret. I wasn't hers to command anymore. That evening, a final message arrived. "I don't know who I am without you." For a moment, just a moment, I felt the ghost of something old stir inside me. Pity maybe. Regret. But it flickered. Strategic acquisitions, including eventually, the parent company that Marissa's firm answered to. It was Mateo who set up the first introductions. Archer who handled the paperwork. Me? I did what I always did. Stayed quiet. Stayed invisible. Stayed underestimated. That was the secret. Marissa and her world never saw me coming. Simon Keene was the kind of man who only learned to speak by hearing himself talk. He didn't just overlook me, he dismissed me entirely. At company parties, he would throw an arm around my shoulder, glass of scotch in hand, and ask if I was still doing that home project thing. Like I was some well-fed hobbyist kept afloat by his high-performing executive. He never imagined I'd become the man signing his checks. The day we closed the acquisition, I didn't even attend the final meeting. Mateo did. Archer was there, too. I watched the handshake happen over a secure video link while sipping coffee in my kitchen. No fanfare, no fireworks, just business. That's the thing about real power. It's quiet, measured, effective. Once the acquisition was finalized, the next phase began. The documents we sent to Simon, the files detailing Marissa's misconduct, they weren't just a strategic bomb. They were a reflection of everything I had endured. Every falsified report, every silenced complaint she'd buried with charm and intimidation. It wasn't about destroying her. It was about exposing the lies she'd built her success on. And it worked. The fallout spread like wildfire, not just through her company, but through the wider industry. The whispers began. Was it true? Did she really do all that? How did no one catch this earlier? I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. But the real shift, the deeper one, was internal. I no longer flinched when people looked at me. I no longer apologized for taking up space, for speaking plainly, for having ambition. I remembered what it felt like to have purpose again, to stand on ground that wasn't shifting under someone else's weight. The friends who stuck around during the dark times, the ones who never judged, never asked why I stayed so long, they were still with me. And now they saw me rise, not with fanfare or ego, but with quiet certainty. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was building something that didn't require it. Marissa, meanwhile, was still spiraling. Her texts had grown erratic. Apologetic 1 minute, accusatory the next. "We were partners," she wrote. "How could you just abandon everything we had?" The irony was suffocating. She never realized that I had been abandoned years ago. Not in action but in heart. She had stopped being my partner long before I stopped being her husband. Now I was the man she never imagined I'd become. The one she tried to keep small. The one who learned to play the long game. Every smug glance she'd ever thrown. Every time she scoffed at my ideas. Every dismissive laugh across a crowded dinner party. They all had a cost. And she was finally paying the bill. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance, and I was done living in deficit. The text started changing tone around midnight. At first, they were just frantic little flashes, desperate pings lighting up my phone screen like dying fireflies. I'm sorry. Please, let's just talk. I made a mistake. I can fix this. I turned my phone face down on the nightstand and let them pile up, unread, like leaves gathering in a forgotten street. By morning, the messages had evolved from pleading to bargaining, promises she couldn't keep, hopes she didn't deserve. We can get through this. We're stronger than this. I still love you. You're still my husband. That means something, right? Funny how the words that once could have broken me now barely scratched the surface. I sat on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise stretch across the city skyline. It painted the world in hues of golden orange, crisp and clean, as if daring me to believe in new beginnings. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was simply done. It wasn't just Marissa trying to claw her way back into my life. Her family started too. Texts from her mother, her sister, even her father. The same people who once toasted her success with gleaming glasses and called me the luckiest man alive. Like it was a consolation prize. She's been through a lot, her mother wrote. She needs you. Her father was less sentimental. Man up and fix this before you destroy your marriage. I laughed when I read that one. A short, humorless sound that echoed around the empty living room. Destroy the marriage? That bridge had burned long before I ever picked up the match. They didn't understand. They saw the headlines, the scandal, the whispers around town, and thought the worst thing Marissa had lost was her career. They thought the real tragedy was the fall from grace. They couldn't comprehend a real loss, trust, partnership, the kind of love that doesn't need applause to feel real. That was gone, and nothing could resurrect it. The days blurred together, each one a fresh layer of desperation added to the pile. Marissa's texts grew longer, more erratic. Late-night calls I let ring into silence. Voicemails that started with her crying and ended with her screaming. You're heartless, she spat in one message. You're not the man I married. She was right. I wasn't. The man she married would have forgiven her. Would have folded himself in half trying to fix things. Would have accepted the blame just to keep the peace. That man was dead, buried under years of belittling comments, silent resentments, and the slow, systematic erosion of self-worth. The man who stood in his place now is different. Stronger. Wiser. Unbreakable. Marissa tried every tactic. Nostalgia, guilt, seduction, anger. She sent old photos, texted memories she thought would crack my armor. Remember our trip to Napa? Remember our first apartment? How happy we were! She painted our past in golden light, hoping I'd forget the shadow she cast over it. But memory is a tricky thing. It doesn't just recall the good. It drags up everything. The fights disguised as jokes. The lonely nights spent 2 feet apart but worlds away. The way she would weaponize silence when words didn't cut deep enough. I remembered it all. And the good parts? They weren't enough anymore. They couldn't erase the rot underneath. Her friends, once a swirling, laughing entourage around her, fell eerily silent. No more group chats buzzing with validation. No more likes on her curated social media posts. Silence replaced adoration. And Marissa wasn't built to survive in silence. The loneliness hit her like a slow-moving train, inevitable and crushing. One afternoon, after ignoring a dozen more calls, I caught a glimpse of her outside the building. She sat in her car across the street, sunglasses on, face hidden behind the tinted glass, watching, waiting, hoping. I didn't confront her. I didn't even acknowledge her. I simply walked past, my spine straight, my heart steady, a silent message she couldn't misinterpret. I wasn't hers to command anymore. That evening, a final message arrived. I don't know who I am without you. For a moment, just a moment, I felt the ghost of something old stir inside me. Pity maybe. Regret. But it flickered out just as quickly as it came. Because the truth was, she never wanted me. She wanted the version of me she could control. She wanted a mirror that reflected her own success back at her, not a partner who dared to dream his own dreams. As she unraveled, the reality set in deeper and deeper. I wasn't coming back to fix anything. This wasn't a break. This wasn't a rough patch. This was the end. And for the first time in years, the end didn't terrify me. It liberated me. I wasn't the man begging for scraps of affection anymore. I wasn't the fool waiting at the door for a love that had long since curdled. I was the man who knew his worth. The man who had walked through fire and come out the other side with scars he wore like armor. Marissa's desperation wasn't my burden to carry. Not anymore. I finished my coffee, set the empty cup down on the balcony rail, and leaned back in my chair as the sun dipped below the horizon. Another day closing. Another piece of the past shedding itself from my skin. I wasn't running from her. I was walking toward myself. And I wasn't looking back. Marissa didn't go quietly. Of course, she didn't. She fought the divorce with the same ferocity she once used to climb the corporate ladder, clawing, spinning half-truths into sob stories, twisting every small detail into some kind of injustice against her. Her attorney filed motion after motion, contesting everything from property division to spousal support, trying to paint her as the wounded party. But what Marissa never understood, what she couldn't understand, was that I hadn't entered this battle blind. I had spent months, maybe years if I was honest, quietly gathering the armor I would need for this exact war. Every careless word she uttered, every lie she scribbled onto financial documents, every instance of marital misconduct, all of it documented, notarized, archived. She had lived so high above consequences for so long that she forgot the ground still existed. The first hearing was brutal for her, not for me. She arrived draped in black like a widow mourning a life stolen from her. Her makeup was heavier than usual, eyes rimmed in dark liner to sell the image of suffering. She clutched tissues in one hand like props she was ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Her lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit, leaned over and whispered theatrically in her ear every few minutes, as if coaching a witness about to take the stand. I sat quietly at my table. My lawyer Archer sat beside me, calm and collected. I didn't need theatrics. I had facts. When the judge asked Marissa's attorney for evidence to support her financial claims, they stumbled. The numbers didn't add up. Documents contradicted themselves. In her desperation, Marissa had fabricated claims she couldn't back up, hoping emotion would outweigh truth. It didn't. Then came the evidence Archer and I had prepared. Bank statements showing her private purchases disguised as business expenses. Emails where she admitted to hiding money. Recordings where she joked to friends about keeping the loser in the dark. It was all there, laid bare under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom. Marissa cracked before my eyes. First, her shoulders stiffened. Then, her hand clutched the tissue tighter, shredding it without even realizing. Finally, when Archer played the voicemail she had left during a drunken girls' night, mocking me for trusting her with the finances, her composure broke entirely. She gasped, loud and shrill, standing up as if sheer outrage could erase the truth playing over the speakers. The judge's gavel came down hard. "Sit down, Mrs. Hull." Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, trying to ground her, but it was too late. Everyone saw it. The cracks in the polished exterior, the truths she couldn't outrun anymore. When the final ruling came weeks later, it was swift and devastating. The house remained mine, held safely in the trust. The joint investments she assumed she could siphon from, locked beyond her reach. The accounts she thought she could drain during the proceedings had been sealed months earlier. All her counterclaims dismissed. She was left with nothing but the debt she had racked up under our shared name, which I had proved she accrued without my consent. As the judge read the final orders, Marissa sat stone still, her face frozen in a mask of disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. In her mind, she was the victor, the survivor, the one who left people, not the one left behind. She had underestimated me so thoroughly, so absolutely, that even now, with the gavel struck and the papers signed, she couldn't comprehend how she had lost. I gathered my things quietly, the same way I had built this life in the shadows she never bothered to look into. As I stood to leave, Archer slid a small box across the table toward me, his eyes glinting with a rare flicker of amusement. The box was nondescript, plain cardboard, taped hastily at the seams. Inside it was everything Marissa had been allowed to keep from our shared life. A handful of trinkets she hadn't even remembered to claim, a pair of sunglasses, a set of monogrammed towels from our second anniversary, and on top, perfectly folded, was the t-shirt. Loser of the house. The same one she had gleefully handed me the night my marriage truly died. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the shirt resting innocently in the box. I could almost hear her laughter, sharp and careless, floating back from that night. The room spinning with champagne and self-congratulation. The moment she thought she had finally cemented her superiority over me. Funny how things change. I didn't take the box with me. I didn't need it. I left it sitting on the courthouse bench where it belonged, abandoned and meaningless, just like the life she had tried to build on my broken back. Outside, the afternoon sun hit my face, warm and blinding. I blinked into the brightness, breathing in the sharp, clean air like a man stepping out of a long, suffocating tunnel. The courthouse behind me felt smaller somehow, shrinking into the background as I moved forward. Marissa remained inside, alone, defeated, clinging to scraps she had once thrown away without a second thought. I didn't feel victorious. It wasn't that kind of moment. There were no fist pumps, no triumphal music swelling in the background. What I felt was lighter. Like someone who had been carrying a heavy stone up a mountain for years and had finally reached the summit. Not to claim it, but to let the stone go and watch it tumble away into the void below. The past was ashes now, and I had no interest in sifting through them. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse, coffee in hand, watching the city stretch before me like an endless canvas. The skyline was alive, glittering, breathing. It wasn't just a view. It was a reminder. A reminder that freedom didn't come from grand gestures or flashy declarations. It came from quiet, stubborn persistence. From reclaiming pieces of yourself one breath at a time. The business I had built quietly, methodically, while Marissa had been chasing promotions and applause, it thrived now. It was a machine fueled by every moment I had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. I didn't need a company newsletter or a fancy corner office to validate my success. My wins didn't require an audience anymore. They were real, tangible, built on foundations Marissa had never bothered to see. The friends I kept close now were different, too. Mateo Sinclair, Archer Wren, a few others who had stuck by me, not because they needed something, but because they saw me, even when I wasn't trying to impress anyone. The kind of friendships that didn't dissolve when scandal touched the edges of your life. The kind that stayed. I sipped my coffee and thought about love. People asked, of course, friends, family, even strangers at networking events, their voices low and curious. Seeing anyone yet? Back on the market? I would smile, polite but non-committal, and say something about focusing on myself right now. It wasn't that I was closed off to love. Not exactly. But love, real love, the kind that doesn't have conditions buried under compliments or loyalty traded for status, felt sacred now. It deserved patience, respect. It deserved the version of me who had walked through fire and come out better, not bitter. Maybe someday, but not today. Today was for breathing. For feeling the weightlessness of a life I had rebuilt with my own hands. For standing on my own 2 feet. No strings attached. No apologies necessary. There were moments, brief and flickering, when ghosts of the past brushed against the edges of my mind. A smell, a song, a familiar street corner. Memories, good and bad, would surface without warning. I didn't fight them. I let them pass through me like waves, knowing they didn't have power over me anymore. Marissa's name still popped up occasionally in conversations I wasn't part of. Whispers about her new job, smaller, less glamorous. Hushed rumors about the debt she was still drowning under. People speculating if she would bounce back, if she would find herself again. I never joined in. I didn't need to. She was part of a closed chapter, a finished book. I had no interest in rereading it. I turned from the balcony and walked inside. The penthouse was bright, open, filled with things I had chosen deliberately. The reclaimed wood dining table I built myself. The leather armchair that molded perfectly to my body. The framed photographs of places I had visited alone, breathing in freedom like oxygen. Nothing was there to impress anyone else. It was mine. Every inch of it, a reflection of a life lived on my own terms. The walls weren't covered in awards or achievements. I didn't need trophies anymore. I had something better. Peace. I spent my days differently now. Mornings were for long walks through the city, stopping into quiet coffee shops or bookstores tucked between skyscrapers. Afternoons were for work, building partnerships, mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded me of the man I used to be, hungry and overlooked. Evenings were for simple joys, a good book, a home-cooked meal, the soft hum of music filling the space between solitude and serenity. And nights? Nights were for dreaming again. Not the frantic, desperate dreams of a man trying to prove something, but the soft, steady dreams of a man who knew who he was and didn't need anyone's permission to exist. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was living. There was a strength in that I had never understood before. A kind of quiet invincibility that came from surviving without bitterness. From refusing to let betrayal define you. I had learned that healing didn't mean pretending it hadn't hurt. It meant acknowledging the scars and realizing they were proof not of weakness, but of endurance. Marissa once called me the loser of the house. Maybe she really believed it back then. But standing there, coffee cooling in my hand, the city pulsing below me, I realized she had never seen me at all. She had seen what she wanted to see. A placeholder. A trophy. A safe bet. Not the man who could rebuild an entire life from the ashes she left behind. Not the architect of his own victory. I set the coffee down and walked through my home, the floors cool against my bare feet. I paused by the window that overlooked the river, the sunlight glinting off the water like scattered diamonds. There was no parade celebrating this life I had built. No standing ovation. Just the steady beat of my heart, and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. No longer defined by the house or the marriage or the title someone else slapped on me in a moment of cruelty. I was my own man now. And in my new life, there was no room for anything less. The package arrived on a rainy afternoon, tucked between bills and an overpriced catalog I never subscribed to. No return address, just my name in careful script on the front of a plain brown box. The kind of thing you almost ignore, almost throw away. But something about the handwriting gave me pause. I stood in the foyer for a moment, rain dripping off my coat. The sound of the city dulled behind the thick glass of the penthouse windows. I carried the box to the kitchen and opened it with a steak knife. Careful. Slow. Inside, folded with eerie precision, was the T-shirt. The loser of the house. And beneath it, a handwritten note pinned in the same deliberate script. You were never the loser. I just couldn't see you. I stared at it for a long time. No fury rose in me. No heartbreak. Just stillness, like someone had rung a bell in an empty chapel and left before the echo faded. I reached into the box and held the shirt between my fingers. The cotton soft, worn. It still smelled faintly like her perfume. The scent of a woman who once stood tall in every room, who believed she was untouchable. There was a time when something like this would have torn me apart. A time when her acknowledgement, her regret, would have been a lifeline. But that time had passed. I walked to the fireplace, flipped the switch, and watched the flames crackle to life. No ceremony. No hesitation. I folded the shirt again, pressed it flat, and placed it into the fire. The cotton caught quickly. The bold black letters curled and blackened, then vanished in a wisp of smoke. I watched it burn until there was nothing left. No anger, no sadness, only peace. That shirt had once been her punchline, a symbol of how little she saw me, how much she had convinced herself I was beneath her. It had lived in the drawer like a curse for months, and then later a reminder, and now it was gone. Turned to ash like every other illusion she ever held about me. The note I kept, not for nostalgia, not for meaning, but because it proved something I already knew. Even she saw it now. She knew she lost not because I was weak, but because I had been strong in silence. She played fast, loud, dirty. I played long, slow, and clean. And in the end, her empire was rubble. Mine stood taller than ever. Checkmate. I sat down by the window, watching the rain trace crooked paths down the glass. The city blurred behind it like a watercolor. The past 6 months hadn't just been recovery, they'd been revelation. Every part of my life now is deliberate, chosen, earned. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It nourished me. People talk about closure like it's some grand moment, a confrontation, a breakthrough, a final, searing goodbye. But sometimes closure is quieter than that. It's the silence after the storm. The way your heart doesn't race when their name flashes across your screen. The way you let go of the version of yourself who needed them to validate your worth. Marissa's message wasn't a door reopening. It was a final nail in the one I had already sealed shut. Whatever apology she offered, whatever guilt she carried, that was her burden, not mine. I didn't need her guilt. I didn't need her to see me. I had already seen myself. And that was enough. I thought back to the beginning, to the night of that party. The string quartet playing while I stood outside alone. Fireworks bursting above a house I paid for but was never welcomed into. I remembered the t-shirt being tossed into my hands like a joke. The smirk on her face, the champagne glass clinking against the marble counter while she laughed with people who didn't even know my name. That was the night my marriage ended. But it was also the night something else began. The long game. The strategy. The awakening. People like Marissa live for the next applause, the next promotion, the next shiny thing to dangle in front of an audience. But I learned that real strength didn't need applause. It didn't perform. It built quietly, steadily, with precision. Marissa thought she was playing chess, but she was too busy showing off her queen to notice I was taking pawns one by one until the board was mine. And now I didn't need to win. I already had. Not just in court, not just in the bank accounts and the assets and the headlines, but in my soul. I had rebuilt not just a life, but a self. A man who no longer chased people who made him feel small. A man who didn't beg to be seen, didn't shrink to fit someone else's spotlight. A man who knew his own worth so thoroughly, so fully, that not even regret could sway him. I rose from the chair, poured myself a drink, and toasted quietly to the room. To the loser of the house, I whispered, a smile curling at the edges of my mouth. And then I added softly, reverently, to the man who outgrew it. The fire crackled, the rain poured, and the world outside carried on, unaware that somewhere, high above the streets, a man had claimed his final victory with no rage, no cruelty, just clarity and peace.